And Zeleny also designed the ornaments that go around the medallions. So we're connected to the earth. We're connected to this community that we call the biosphere, that we call the earth, and we cannot live apart from it even for a few days. A shofar is a ceremonial ram's horn that was suggested, that's used in the Jewish tradition to call people together. 1864 is the cornerstone for the first black church in Frederick, All Saints Church, located on the hill above the bridge. And the story is that during the Civil War, the blacks were only allowed in the balcony of this church, and only whites were allowed down below. They owned it. But then they built a new church, and they sold the old one to the black congregation, but then they forgave the note. And the person that suggested this said it represents shared spiritual values. A civil rights leader, a legendary civil rights leader, said a person meditating represents community because they're contacting a level of reality beneath superficial differences like age and gender and race. A person meditating or a person praying, they said. This is the hand play sequence. Here's the church, here's the steeple. Open the doors and see the people. And a real estate agent said a falling star represents community because it gives us all a sense of this divine power to inspire us and to shape our world. The medallion that goes with this are the clustered spires, which represents the religious pluralism in Frederick that has always been part of Frederick, and it was suggested by all of these folks. This is, the eye of God looking down. This is an open church door. It was suggested by the board of directors of All Saints Church, and it's their church door, and I think it speaks for itself. Native American prayer wheel, a Buddhist begging bowl, the Mobius strip. It looks like it has two sides, but really it only has one. And I finally figured out what all these have in common, which is a connection to a higher community, some higher order, whatever you might perceive that to be, that we're all part of, that we're all connected with. And it's interpreted many different ways by many different people. And it led to this culminating feature of the bridge, which expresses that notion, but it also expresses what we learned in doing this project and listening to all these community voices as they came in and trying to make sense out of them and hear the voices that were, the one collective voice that was speaking through all these diverse voices. This is called Archangel, and it looks distorted when you get to it at the end of the bridge. Everything else looks pretty normal, but not this. And you try to figure out what's going on, and you walk around, and the closer you get, it still looks distorted. And you might think that there's something wrong with it, but there really is no distortion at all in this image. It's a complete illusion that there's distortion to it. We have a preconception in our minds, a habitual way of seeing that's causing it to look distorted. If you walk around long enough, eventually you find the correct angle, and the image is completely transformed. And the distortion goes away because it was never there to begin with. This is an anamorphic projection. It's a type of artist perspective that was made to be seen from an angle, first developed by Leonardo da Vinci. It shows that where you stand determines what you see. The community looks incredibly divided, and it looks distorted, and it looks wrong. There's so many things wrong about the world. How many people agree with, was it Thoreau who said most people lead lives of quiet desperation? How many people agree with that? I usually notice that there's like 3/4 of the audience puts their hands up. That is the human condition.
There's something called the human condition. We're talking about being isolated and alone in a fairly hostile universe. Now, what Community Bridge does is allow us for just a minute to get out of the middle of the crowd and to go up on a mountain and look at it from that different perspective, just like you need to look at Archangel from a different perspective to really see her.
It gives you a new perspective, and you realize that everyone values connection as much as you do. I said before how easily paint can fool the eye as a metaphor for how easily we're fooled by these surface differences in each other, like attitude, like language, like race, gender, nationality, ethnicity. The list goes on and on. Those differences lock us into stereotypes of who we can connect with, and so we cut ourselves off from others without even knowing we're doing it.
So when we're standing on that mountain and not in the middle of our crowd, what we see about the human condition is that instead of being cut off and isolated, we're actually connected in every possible direction.
However alone we might feel or alienated, this piece, the Forgotten Song, shows us that we are connected to the earth. We're connected to the biosphere that supports us every day. And the Unfound Door shows us that we're connected to others in many ways we don't notice necessarily. We overlook them. And the Light Within shows us we're connected to a value within us that a master can see whether we can or not. It's always there. We're connected to that. An archangel shows, of course, that we're connected to some higher order. You can interpret that however you might like. We're connected below to all sides. We're connected above, and we're connected within. That's the reality of our lives. That's our true nature. That's the voice that I heard speaking through the bridge. It took me a long time to hear it, but that's how it all kind of came together in the end. And so we began telling these stories back to the community and telling all of those things that I just said to you in tours that we had to give all day, every day for the last 3 years of the project, because by now so many people were coming down to see what these crazy artists were doing that we couldn't get any work done otherwise. Plus we felt like it was incumbent on us to give back to the community the stories they gave to us, transformed into a more collective kind of a voice. And by the time we finished, there were about 50,000 people a year coming down just to see what this thing was they had read about. It had been in papers around the country. We had gotten ideas from all over the country by this time. And then we began to get them from all over the world. And by the end, we had gotten them from 30 countries on 6 continents. And there were several hundred large donors who helped fund it. And every stone in the bridge is sponsored by an individual or a company through the Bridge Bond program. And so at the end of the project in 1998, dancers were once again visible on those bare, flat conduits, preparing for the final event that was held to celebrate the completion of the project. 5,000 people gathered at sunset, and there was dancing and music and a live message, a video message that was sent over from a sister project in South Africa, transforming a bridge on a roadway between Johannesburg and Soweto that were divided under apartheid, and they were trying to reunite. And of course, our goal was to make as much noise as possible down there. So today the bridge is used by corporate and school groups of many kinds for lots of different sorts of trainings and tours. And it's the community voice speaking through the bridge that gives it its power. It could have simply been a painted bridge. It would have been fine. What made it more, what made it one of Frederick's leading attractions, and what brought all of the media was the fact that the community speaking through it was so incredibly eloquent, and so many people in the community worked together to make it happen. Many companies, many individuals. And these bare conduits, you know, we had moved on and worked on other projects, but we kept a close eye on what was going to happen, because now so many people were coming down that developers were starting to pay attention and snap up the lots on both sides of the creek, and the plans for the park began to move forward again. And the first thing they did, this had nothing to do with us at all, was to invite the whole community to paint their own paintings on the conduits, on the bare conduits that had been bare for so long, so that they would be covered by the park as it was installed on top of the conduits and might be discovered years from now when they pulled them up. The construction of the creek went forward, and today it's this design that you see here. It has brought some $350 million in public and private development to Frederick. I read an estimate in the paper of 1,500 jobs it's bringing downtown, which is very helpful for a lot of the folks who live downtown and don't necessarily have a way to drive to projects. All of the bridges are art bridges now on the creek. And there's lots of different kinds of residential housing, first floor retail, fountains, public art, and many amenities. So my symbol for community, for an object that represents the spirit of community, is a bridge. Bridges take separate land and they make common ground. And you now have the opportunity, having heard these community voices, to do what it took us 5 years to do with this bridge, which is to, see these connections where you might not have seen them before. What matters is that you always have the choice to build a bridge, to walk across a bridge, to make a bridge. A bridge is always possible. Thank you.